Armored Core 6 hat neues Gameplay hochgeladen, 13 Minuten Video. Ja, ich habe gerade auch schon was gesehen. Kurz reingeguckt. Sollen wir uns das kurz mal reinziehen oder was?
I recently got to play over 5 hours of Armored Core 6 through the entirety of the game's first chapter, and, well, what better impression is there than I'm more impatient than ever to play the full game. A few days back, Bandai Namco invited me to a hands-on preview event, one that exuded a lot of confidence given how much of the game we were allowed to play with little supervision. They also went completely extra and brought an actual pilotable frickin' mech, which was cool and all, but my main focus was, of course, playing as much of Armored Core 6 as possible, and I remember not being able to pull myself away from the game. The build I was playing was running on PC with Xbox controllers connected to them, and they were confident enough to allow us to capture our own footage, which is what you'll be seeing. My hands-on experience is only relegated to single player though. The game will have multiplayer features, but that was just not part of this preview event. There was one mission where I was accompanied by friendly AI mechs though, so maybe that's a glimpse of sorts of what that experience could be like. Now, what I need to immediately communicate is that Armored Core 6 is not a Soulsborne game. It's not Dark Souls or Elden Ring with mechs. This is Armored Core through and through, with a focus on mech customization, fast-paced combat, freedom of horizontal and vertical mobility, and encounter designs centered around large-scale arenas, skirmishes, and boss battles. This is not a seamless open-world game. You'll instead be going from mission to mission, the completion of which will earn you money that will allow you to buy mech parts, each of which can last anywhere from a couple minutes to 1 or 2 dozen minutes, maybe more depending on how many times you have to retry an encounter, each featuring levels of varying sizes, some more linear and contained, others expansive in their volume, but all focused on delivering exhilarating encounters and scenarios rather than serving as exploration hubs.
Okay, also wir halten fest, er sagt, es ist kein Souls-like mit Robotern oder Mechs. Es ist ein Armored Core durch und durch. Es gibt Missionen, es gibt keine Open World, es gibt Missionen, die man nacheinander macht. Man kriegt nach Missionen Geld, die man in neue Mech-Teile investieren kann, die unterschiedlich lange halten können, je nach Spielweise. So weit, so gut.
Now, even if you are more of a Soulsborne fan than an Armored Core fan, what I can tell you is that this is a FromSoft game through and through. There was a portion of time in the first few hours of the game where I did fear how easy the game felt, but then came certain missions and boss battles that absolutely tested my capabilities in the best ways, and all of my concerns washed away. The FromSoft DNA of trial and error, mastery through repetition, and a sense of euphoria from overcoming difficult challenges through skill and guile is very much still here. But the level of mech customization that Armored Core offers means you can strategize on a whole other level than Soulsborne games. You can customize everything from your 4 weapons, to on each hand and 2 on each shoulder, to the head, the body or core, the arms, the legs, your booster, your fire control system, and your generator. The full depths of this customization system was not possible to grasp within just 5 hours, but I found that legs in particular will drastically impact the way your mech moves. Bipedal legs allow for very flexible mobility. The tank legs allow for fast on-the-ground mobility with drifting capabilities. The tetrapod legs allow for a hovering stance for death from above. And each of these have their own pros and cons, each have their uses depending on the mission, combat scenario, or boss battle. Other body parts define how much armor points or health your mech has, how heavy or light it is, how efficient its boost capabilities and aerial mobility are, how much EN, which is the stamina in this game, your mech will have for boost maneuvers, the efficiency of your aiming and lock-on capabilities.
Okay, was gibt's da? Guckt euch mal an, wie viele Werte es da gibt. Boost Speed, QB, EN Consumption, QB Reload Time, EN Capacity, EN Supply Efficiency, EN Recharge Delay, Total Weight, Total Arms Load Limit, Total Load Limit, Total EN Load, EN Output Current Load, Current Arms Load, Current EN Load. Holy shit.
The quantity and weight of weapons that can be equipped. With all these factors in play, it very much becomes a meticulous balancing act, with a process involving customizing your mechs to prioritize certain attributes at the sacrifice of others. A nimbler mech will move much faster, dodge more efficiently, and boost for longer, but will have low health and can't carry many heavy weapons, whereas tankier mechs will move slower, be harder to dodge with, and have a harder time boosting, but can take more hits and can carry those heavier weapons and more powerful armaments to compensate. It is absolutely tangible how different all of these varied builds feel. Now, unlike in Soulsborne games where it is for the most part demanded that you commit to the points you spend on your stats, in Armored Core 6, there are no shackles on build customization. The whole idea is to continuously tweak for every situation, especially since there's not one build that will be ideal for every scenario. That's why the game allows you to sell parts for as much money as you bought them, to make it simple to prioritize your most used mech parts. It's why the game goes as far as allowing you to recustomize your mech when you die before retrying again, why it features checkpoints for each major sequence of a mission. And with a variety of mission types, levels, skirmishes, encounter scenarios, and boss battles that the game offered during my 5 hours hands-on session, it became clear that attempting to stick to a single mech build to carry you through the full campaign will prove to be a fool's errand or a masochist's great challenge. Not to say every mission will be a struggle.
Okay, also das Spiel will, dass man quasi nach jedem entscheidenden Kampf oder Level seinen Mech neu ausrichtet und nicht ein Bild nimmt, mit dem man durchs ganze Spiel geht.
There are plenty that are fairly easy and manageable to get through. The earlier missions in particular are more about getting you acclimated to handling your mech in different situations. Speaking of, the mechs do handle and control extremely well in Armored Core 6. We have definitely come a long way from the cumbersome days of the earlier entries. The controls are pretty simple. The left analog stick moves your mech, the right analog stick moves the camera, the right and left triggers fire your right and left hand weapons, the right and left shoulder buttons fire your right and left shoulder weapons. Holding down Y and pressing a weapon button will manually reload that weapon, and from there you've got your mobility options. On an Xbox controller, A is to jump. Holding A keeps you boosted in the air. B is for boosted mobility. This does not consume energy or stamina. X is to perform a quick dash or a quick boost in any given direction. Think of this as your dodge button. And then clicking the left analog stick will see your mech perform what's called an assault boost, which propels you towards where your camera is facing or towards a locked-on target, which can be used as both a mobility option or as a means to close the distance to follow up with, say, a melee attack. Finally, you have some utility buttons like clicking the right analog stick to lock on, pressing up on the D-pad to use limited repair kits to heal, and then down on the D-pad to scan your environment and tag nearby enemies to gauge their location. The game also includes training missions to further help you familiarize yourself with the controls and the feel of different builds of mechs and different varieties of weapons. It only took me a few missions before I felt like I had a full grasp of the game's combat system. It felt like an easy to get into, hard to master kind of situation, and once that muscle memory was locked in, piloting the mech became an exhilarating pleasure. Moving, boosting, and dashing around had a great sense of speed, acceleration, and momentum. Long-range attacks as well as melee weapons felt impactful thanks to the care that was placed in visual and audio design. Each weapon had their advantages, disadvantages, and overall feel, some being more effective against certain types of enemies than others. And button mapping and controls all felt pretty smooth and intuitive. Now, I'm sure that 5 hours of playtime was nowhere near enough to explore the full arsenal of weapons that I'll get to experiment with, but I did use machine guns, burst rifles, single-shot rifles, plasma weapons, explosive weapons like bazookas and grenade launchers, and on my shoulders I've mounted rockets, targeted lasers, and shields, all deployable and usable at the press of trigger and shoulder buttons. Different weapons also have different reload times, which act essentially as cooldown timers, and you have to keep that in consideration as you use your weapons and try to use them strategically and in the most efficient and effective way possible. But yeah, I felt like there was a good amount of tools to experiment with within these initial hours alone, and I suspect that the arsenal will grow drastically throughout the course of the campaign. And I imagine that the tradition of the Moonlight Sword being in a FromSoft game will carry through in Armored Core 6. I'll look forward to finding that. Now, while I've emphasized before that Armored Core 6 is not a Soulsborne game, it does inherit some of its core combat features. Repair kits, for example, are essentially the equivalent of Dark Souls' Estus heals, with a limited amount of 3 available per mission. You can hard lock onto enemies now, like you can in Soulsborne titles, and there is a Sekiro-style stagger system that allows you to stun enemies if you build up their stagger meter or break their posture, if you will. Armored Core purists might question these changes, but I for one think that they're really welcome features to the game's combat. None of them felt like they crippled or diminished the gameplay and sense of challenge in any way. Instead, they just added extra layers. So even though you have heals now through repair kits, certain stronger enemies and bosses will kick your ass even with those heals. Trust me, you'll need them. The lock-on system can be used optionally, and there are plenty of situations where you might actually be better off not hard locking on to enemies, especially when there are a bunch of them surrounding you. And the stagger meter adds depth and strategy to the weapons that you prioritize, and in the way you fight tougher mechs. It reshapes your conception of how to take down these enemies and how to use your weapons and in what order to fire them and whatnot. And on the defense side of things, you yourself can get staggered as well, so you got to be careful of that and make sure that enemies don't land those heavy hits on you. The core mechanics honestly just felt great, and experimentation of mech assembly was further encouraged by the variety of scenarios the game presented me with to test my mech's capabilities. Now, missions in this game do pretty much involve going from mission marker to mission marker from one...
Ja, das interessiert mich nämlich. Kann man was finden? Gibt's irgendwie Loot? Gibt's Erfahrungspunkte? Erzähl mal was, also... Was kann man denn...
Scenario to the next, from one battle to the other. There is none of that vaguely directed exploration and sense of discovery found in, say, Elden Ring or anything of the sort. But the kinds of challenges that the Armored Core 6 missions present still can vary quite a bit, at least within these first few hours. The larger scale and more open levels will feature small to mid-sized mech enemies alongside long-range turrets placed in strategic positions in such a way that navigating the environment and just running in without a strategy will surely get you killed. The smaller and more self-contained levels will encourage fast-paced skirmishes with enemy mechs of varying sizes and difficulties, with some occasions where you might encounter enemy customized mechs that will test your one-on-one dueling capabilities. Some missions will linearly string along multiple types of level designs and combat scenarios to keep you on your toes. And then there are the boss battles where you'll be testing the culmination of all of your learnings to defeat them. Boss battles tend to be my favorite part of Soulsborne and FromSoft games, and this is one area where so far, Armored Core 6 has absolutely not disappointed. In the first 5 hours of the game that encompasses the first chapter, I encountered two bosses in particular that took me multiple tries to overcome by learning their attack patterns and weaknesses and by adjusting my own strategies and mech build. One of them was this giant tank with shields in the front, and for the first half of the battle I had an ally to help distract it while I attacked it from the back, but for the second half of the fight I was left to fight the boss alone, so that required me to study its patterns and find ways to get behind its shield to deal damage. And the thing about these boss battles is that because of the level of mobility that the game offers the player in this game, the bosses themselves have to compensate for that with onslaughts of attacks that you would not see in Soulsborne games, a combination of things like a barrage of mines on the ground, large AoE attacks, barrages of projectiles, and powerful and wide-reaching melee attacks. There's just a lot more going on in these boss battles compared to Soulsborne titles because you, as a mech, can do so much more, so everything feels faster, more frenetic, and it all evokes this sense of like a roller coaster ride of a boss battle kind of feeling, but it's all designed to be masterable as well. It's not just chaos, it's organized chaos. Another boss battle I encountered towards the end of Chapter 1 was this flying machine that focused on constant barrages of projectiles in the first half, and then in the second half, it would combine the barrages of projectiles with these large-scale melee attacks. This boss kicked my ass quite a few times, and while I did get close to beating it, unfortunately I wasn't able to do a victory run before my hands-on time ran out. But as I was leaving the event, I was already thinking of ways I could adjust my mech build to compensate for my weaknesses. I was thinking of the boss's attack patterns and ways I could adjust my playstyle and ways I could dodge certain attacks. It's the kind of stuff that gets me excited about FromSoft games fully represented in Armored Core 6. And I haven't even gotten to those bosses that are entire levels and missions within themselves because of how massive they are. There was this one gargantuan boss called the Strider that was essentially the mech version of a Shadow of Colossus boss. I had to find a way to scale this giant mechanized entity before destroying the core that would take it down. So even among boss battles, there were all kinds of cool things the game did by leveraging the scale of the mech genre to keep them varied. And this is where I realized that a game like Armored Core really benefits from its mission-to-mission structure, as each mission can really be tailored to be its own flavor and set piece and offer its own challenge. that will encourage you to revisit your own mech build and your own playstyles. And with the ability to repeat completed missions, you can retroactively go back and experiment with new builds created from parts attained later on in the campaign, and then you can try to get better scores and try to get S ranking in these missions. So I foresee all of this will make Armored Core 6 very replayable. I will, on some level, miss the exploration and lore discovery that Soulsborne titles encourage, but this is just a different genre of FromSoft game altogether, and I welcome the development team sticking to what makes Armored Core special, rather than trying to fit Armored Core into a Soulsborne mold where it might not belong. Now, story is one area where I'm unsure about with Armored Core. It's a much more direct style of storytelling where it's just constant exposition, dialogue, briefings, and information thrown at you to the point where it could kind of feel mind-numbing, where my brain just wasn't paying attention. Hopefully in future chapters, the narrative will develop in a way where my brain will feel compelled to pay attention, but in Chapter 1, it was just a lot of words and technical sci-fi mumbo-jumbo and code names and names of factions thrown around. A lot of just stereotypical mission debriefs and dialogue and voiceover that felt, I don't know, just better suited to, like, Saturday morning cartoons rather than something that was grounded and subdued.
Do you hear me, you corporate vultures? The Rubiconians will never yield. You're going home in armored coffins. Forged in ash, we stand as one. Hot dog, they got an AC. More like an old piece of junk. It's barely different from an MT.
Ich glaube, das wird schon Spaß machen, das Spiel. Wenn man mal Bock drauf hat auf so schöne Action-Keilerei.
Which I think is in line with the general flavor that Armored Core has always had since the series' inception. It's got a more sort of like anime style of dialogue delivery.
Ja, grafisch bin ich auch noch nicht so überzeugt. Die Level, die sehen alle noch ein bisschen...
some intrigue, so depending on how they handle that and how that intrigue evolves into hopefully a really compelling plot, the story could turn around for me and I might actually feel a lot more absorbed by the narrative, but from Chapter 1 alone, the narrative just really didn't hook me because of the way the narrative is delivered in large part, I think. There are the occasional cutscenes here and there, but mostly you're going to be essentially listening to audio logs, though who knows how the narrative and the presentation of that narrative will evolve throughout the course of the campaign. And then visually, FromSoft games, you may know, have never really been carried by the fidelity, but rather by art direction. And I'd say that the same holds true for Armored Core 6. This is a cross-generation title, so while this is the best that Armored Core has ever looked, it's far from the best.
Natürlich sind Häuser rechteckig und so, aber guck mal, das sieht doch alles hier so... Das sieht ja schon jetzt nicht so spektakulär aus. Irgendwie, so, du siehst da im Hintergrund nur graue Wände und...
Soulsborne games could leverage their more fantastical settings to evoke some really compelling scenery. The more futuristic,
muss man mal gucken, wie sich's anfühlt, wo man da überall hin kann, was Kulisse ist, was wirklich Level ist und so weiter. Aber also grafisch haut mich das jetzt nicht aus den
Indoor environments, for example, tend to feel pretty dull in the way that industrial interiors tend to be. But then there are those times when the game presents boss mechs with
das sieht schon wieder ganz
really
cool
cool designs who may be colossal in scale or be aesthetically unique alongside their mesmerizing projectiles and attack patterns, or takes players outdoors and presents landscapes, cityscapes, and vistas that highlight some of the unique aspects of Armored Core. And that's when I'm reminded how much more experienced FromSoft has become since their last Armored Core game. You will definitely find beauty in this game. I'm just curious as to how varied the environments will be throughout the course of the campaign, if they can mesmerize visually on the level that they've done with some of their previous titles. Now, one area where I have little
Die Frage ist halt, was davon
is the music.
Einfach nur zum Angucken und wo kannst du wirklich hin? Ja, nicht schlecht. Ich hab Bock drauf. Wir werden es antesten. Kommt bald raus. Wann kommt's raus? 2 Wochen? 3 Wochen? Fires of Rubik's Cube.